somewhere.
Oh, here we go. All right, so off to a successful launch. The YouTube is happy, and we are doing part 3. We are here for a surprise late day live stream. We're starting now when we normally would be ending, so the day is already, well underway. Let's say. Let's say well underway. It's what is it going to be, a half session? Is that what you're saying?
Half an hour. Have an extra hour.
What does that mean?
6.
Okay. All right. So we got about an hour and a half to stream. So we'll just pop
Get a
up
roll.
the chat. Get a roll.
You start and I'll chime in.
So part 3, part 2 then. Where we left off, I believe, just barely perusing the end of our polymorphic machine section of the book, which is kind of like the second or / main session, I suppose, aside from intro. At the end of that, we were going to get into the stacks, how they work, this whole stacking, this whole holonic type of organizational, schema. And
Sorry,
we didn't really get into this, the animism, the stacks, like the stacking, with
So you want to pick up
upload, download, resonance wakes. I think that's where we're going to start today. We didn't get into it very much at all last time, I think. And this is kind of where I wanted to set up for the jump to the next section of the book, which would entail the market machine. So, as you, Ted, just mentioned before, we started here, and I think this is this answers the question that I posed there. How do you actually jump from one to the other, according to the narrative of the book, to make for a good flow? And so we set up what we're calling animism, these stacks resonating, and upload, download, all that stuff. This is kind of like a generic description of the complexity that organizes life arises, even not only through time but in a static cosmological sense.
That is from the thing that is that's there from moment to moment.
Right.
Say, the thing that is continuous.
And of course, this is one main theme that the book attempts or has to attempt, is to invoke the self-reference in the reader. That's a bit of a tricky task there, but if you listen to enough of these live streams, or ideally read the book, you're going to get the idea real quick that we're describing the thing that listens to somebody tell them how to describe the thing that listens to the blah 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 blah. Instantly we hit one of those crazy loops as soon as we start talking about it. So how to jump from that into the market machine, and your idea, what you just mentioned there, was that this is what happens if you try to automate what life does. When you automate it, it causes this kind of a problem in which the automation doesn't update itself, really. It doesn't sense the world around it. Automation is kind of by definition this negative connotation of what life does, how it organizes.
So the way to see it is more like, if you were to set in stone how something should be interpreted, right? As soon as you send signals that it does not interpret in a certain
according to that protocol,
that don't mesh with that, it could start interpreting it in a falsely way, especially if it's too rigid to adapt to changing signal. So, in the worst case scenario, you get what's called an error, and you don't get any further. You get noise, but the worst case, the actual problematic case scenario, is that whatever is being interpreted is being interpreted incorrectly, and so the next sequence of events doesn't follow from the preceding one, and this is where you can call it obfuscated and broken and
Right.
rigid and not meshing with itself. Kind
Or you
of deal.
could say that one of the events was the one that crashed
The self-reference is
relationship.
lost. The self-reference is
Right.
lost. It is incapable of adjusting itself to a different.
And that's a great way to
pattern.
describe animism. I think the core of itself is animism is self-reference. And when we think of animism, we think
or explicitly incorporated self-reference, if you will.
right. Yeah, because yes. My mind goes down the rabbit hole of the infinite regress, like so much around this topic.
But you can jump out of it by going meta and just labeling the loop itself.
Yeah, as soon as you start doing that. Yeah, so automation, animism, and what we think of animism typically is like ancient pre-civilization, believing that
The trees are
that
alive.
everything is alive and has a soul or whatever, or it's like slowly crawling
Actually,
around.
the soul description is extremely biased, just as a source, because no animist talks about souls.
Yeah.
There is like a reference to like a spirit of some kind, and again, that word is misleading.
Right.
Something
so-
that could be named. This effectively is the case, but what that is not exactly an objective thing of the world. It's more like a combination of the internal interpretive element and the external stimuli that had evoked it. Right. So the spirit is basically like the animating force of that process.
Mhm.
So it's very
Right,
different.
which isn't bound to anything, any concept.
So yeah, the biggest distinction I guess I'm drawing is that you can't put an ontological entity behind it, behind this concept itself. Like it doesn't. If you try to mesh it together with some kind of ontology, you don't really get any kind of useful
Well, you get
results.
the automation, don't you? Isn't that what
You
the
get you get the trinkets if you want to do that, but that requires an extra level of on top of the automation.
Right. So how would you talk about rocks and trees in a way that doesn't ontologically, like if you're trying to say what they are, pre-civ and all
Well,
that?
for one,
How do you
you have the archetype.
you
of
describe
tree.
the relationship, don't you? You talk
have the
about practical matters.
Mhm. You have an archetypical relationship with trees, for example, in the sense that when the word trees evokes, images pop in your head, and it could be like the perfect tree or some tree you remember, and so on and so forth. It's all forever changing. And then you have the model, of course, and then you have the guild of trees that you encounter in real time.
Mm-hmm. And myth would be composed of a bunch of stories about about trees and what can happen.
But these relationships, yes, like the tree in my head, the tree in the way I think of trees, the tree, the word, tree, the experience of
The
like
tree
this
that-
one, that one, the other one.
the tree that smashes your head when you're riding a horse.
That comes later, I guess.
But I guess that's what I mean by like mythological sound bites. The stories of these, like a spirit,
Mhm.
a tree spirit could attack you at any moment if you're like being
My point is that
too crazy around it. It may try to
my
defend
point
itself.
is the spirit of say the tree is given to it by whatever context it appears in. It's
Mhm.
not something that is a thing, but rather it is what manifests out of the context in which it is found and is labeled. Right? It's by building that bridge from the archetypical to the concrete. Right? By making the entire like combining all of the modeling to get there, you have this idea of what
Like,
spirit is.
Isn't this like to
Or
describe?
this spirit is.
So to describe this, we're using instead of using like a scientific type of, okay, the tree is made of cells and made of layers and bark and all this layers, and like through osmosis or whatever is pulling water. You can like just in modern day thought, you can just rattle off, like property after property, but it having nothing to do with. So you take somebody pre-civ and you're talking to them, telling them about trees, and they're like, that has nothing to do with me. So they want to hear, the human being to understand things wants to hear a story, a narrative in which they themselves can put themselves in. So you're describing and singing out a story using like through poetry and whatever and myth, in which they can imagine themselves in that narrative exposition, right?
Yeah.
So this, I just wanted to highlight the different forms of communication and how they're useful in different contexts. So speaking animistically, you don't use a scientific approach to delineate every last property of that compose your
Tree.
your tree, whatever you put the border perimeter around it.
Yeah, the
Right.
border and the perimeter around it have a different signifier,
So I'm
or
wondering,
a different significance entirely.
in Portal Mountain speak, this we would say, I want to say it's a conversation, but what using like triad protocol to what types of speech are there? Have we iterated these?
Speech.
Yeah, like what I just described, the scientific objectivist perspective would want to tell you, iterate every property of something.
This is academic.
Are you sure it's not perceptive? And what is, if not, then what is, or not perceptive, I meant pragmatic.
It's academic.
Okay.
Because
So yeah, I'm just asking also, have we iterated these before?
no,
The types of speech. So like,
I don't believe so, because that's a discussion of a dashboard.
yeah. Yeah, agreed. And this is
So-
like what it just kind of came to me, I guess, too, that we should be talking about different types of speech in relation to this, because we're describing different worlds. The animistic sense is conveyed through different types of speaking than the whatever we're calling academic, if you want to say.
Yeah, so
iterating
then-
every last property.
So
under
the
the sun.
animistic world is more exposed through.
Isn't it simple?
It's
Isn't it
probably
something
more perceptive.
Isn't it
in
a
nature.
story that you want to relate to? You
No,
want
it is a
the
perceptive.
listener to relate to as being perceptive.
Yeah, perception. And
Yeah.
it's a mechanism of perception, and therefore it belongs to that.
And we've
realm.
associated perception with animism before as well.
Mhm.
Perceptive,
Well, in mythology-
perceptive temperament, I should say.
Mythology, narrative, perception are all beyond the horizon combiners of the three, the holonic structure, as the whole.
Hmm. Right. So to sit on one mode of speech, you're by default missing out on the embodied wholeness of the relationship between your mind and your body in that moment.
No, you can't do that by stick it to one mode of speech, because it contains the others within it. So it's a little bit trickier than that.
That would be
if
classic.
It's the lack of the self-reference that shows that to be the case.
Yeah. Okay.
That
Yeah.
that stagnates the particular mode into just being more rigid. Than
Okay, I
than it
get
has
what
to
you're
be.
saying. Yeah. No, that's totally correct.
So it's
So-
it's like the death circle versus non-death circle usage of the same protocol. Right, it's the same protocol at play, but the sequence of signals that keeps coming up just drives it in a loop.
But like something, I'm trying to think of like how could you connect trees in a, like, let's say to somebody in a perceptive mode who wants to know, like, why shouldn't I inhale smoke, or why is that bad for me? And you
No.
break it down to that. It's like,
Well, this is not a discussion of why you shouldn't do those things. If you want to do those things, like
Like this is by the way grand mastery too, right? To that ability to go through your own temperament and into the other
yes,
through your own way of speaking, though.
uh,
Not betraying yourself necessarily.
no, you never betray yourself. It's being able to adopt to the ingress.
Also, there are 16 ingress that we
Four.
times 4 though.
4 times 4. It's 4 ingresses, 4 temperaments.
Yeah, temperament ingress.
It's two sides of the same coin. Usually 1 ingress to 1 temperament inside of a
Yeah,
person.
ingress and temperament. Yeah.
But two
So-
people starting to talk, you have a 4 to 4 possible
Right.
combination.
Yeah. That's what I mean. So and grand mastery being either of the two potentially to.
Well, officially, like the rough outline of like how one should identify as one is when they are able to skip
It is
onto a different ingress. The
kind of an obscure thought
the
among
grand master, if you will, the grand master, is like all 16 at once at all times. That's the archetype.
ideal.
That's the archetype itself. So that's like
Me excuse you.
that is the ideal, obviously, hence being the archetype.
Right. And isn't there there's a funny kind of problem of interpretation there too, although right, because grand mastery, no single signal, a set of signals you could ever make will cause a perfect resonance, isomorphic resonance in all receptive media.
You can't expect all wakes to be
right.
um,
So yeah, there never is that perfect ideal.
no, so that doesn't apply to a wake in particular, but a grand master should be able to adopt to the environment in which
There's
they're in,
practically
in which
speaking,
that
yes.
is
Yes,
the
and
case.
what I was going to say before, the
So it's not-
ability to speak through your own temperament of its flavors, and the ability to speak to another temperament, using not your own flavor, using the other temperament's flavor.
So it's like this kills off a couple of ideas about things like omnipresence and omnipotence, and all of these kinds of
Right.
words, because the backdrop of animism that we're describing is forever shifting and always different in a different kind of flux in different spaces. So what applies here does not necessarily apply right here, but not necessarily right now. But it could have been before, or it could have not, or it could be in the future. So there's none of these restrictions that the concepts that apply to this, because the truth is just like forever shifting. The falsehood is forever shifting, and what is order now is not
Mhm.
necessarily order later. So this is not
Right.
the kind of backdrop in which this is even a question that can be considered. Basically, is the gist of what I'm trying to say.
Mm-mm-mm.
So
Yep.
again, Grand Mastery therefore cannot really dive into these questions or the idea of what's the archetype we're presenting as a object of faith, if you will. Those concepts simply are moot in trying to consider them. Anyway, that's just a small
Mhm.
tangent that I felt important.
No, I think we're kind of on track to meandering through these kind of, I guess, semi like spiritual type concepts,
Well, yeah, because we're
views of the world,
Yeah.
what the world is, what is reality. That's what we got into that a lot last time, I guess.
in particular the question of objective reality in particular is the other end of the spectrum of stupidity, because then it categorizes things with real and unreal, subserving the unreal underneath the real, so thoughts and feelings and anything to do with
What categorizes what spectrum
objective
of stupidity?
the spectrum of stupidity.
I didn't quite get the comment you made.
The objective side
Sorry.
of the spectrum of stupidity deals with reality instead of ethics, right? So it does the same hierarchy, but it's the real that is it's the unreal that's subservient to the real, much like unethical is subservient to the ethical, which allows shuffling of undesirable elements
Right.
into that category.
Justified.
Yeah. So likewise, being eccentric, thought, kind, and all of these things are subservient to being
Right.
productive and.
So the spectrum of stupidity is sort of like an internal excuse for why the mind-body is disconnected, why that relationship isn't there.
Which illuminates where the stupid part comes from.
It's an ongoing excuse or rationale. So I just wanted to pull up. What did? Oh yeah. So I, of course, forgot to share. So definitely 0 people watching. Unless it's YouTubers. Sometimes they pop in.
Oh, those YouTubers of ours.
They pop in. Sure. Just gonna copy that.
Too bad I'm out of food.
Out of food. You hungry again? Do you have the munchies or something?
I didn't eat all day, basically.
Wow. You want my burrito?
Not really.
All right. Cool. Yeah, so we've been kind of meandering around that animism, meta-religion space there, which is great. We didn't get into too many details here, but what we wanted to do right before we get into the market machine is describe in slight bit of detail, not starting from like planetary formation and all that, but these stacks, what is upload and what is download, what is an emergence of a layer, complex adaptive systems, and grammatical capacities. So being able to, at our layer of understanding, speak about all the what has come to pass to create and build this world and reality we see right now.
Allows us to take into account as we pass that information on to another message by fiat.
Right, we're sitting at like kind of the head central nerve station of understanding reality. So here's the model that we use to do it, and we're describing a system of layers in which any type of thing is looked at and viewed upon as a whole-on, in which it contains the whole. By containing the whole, meaning
Got a context.
it doesn't end at itself, and an investigation always is meant to flow never-endingly, and
Right,
that's the animism.
This is the idea of it's in a context. Its context gives it its meaning. But this is the kind of the bridge that we were making earlier with the word spirit to the spirit of the thing at that given moment in time.
Right.
To give a really blunt example of something like that, right now the spirit of this table is, for example, it holds everything that we need it to hold. It's a great tool. We like it as such.
The spirit is doing that?
No. This is how I perceive it, right? So in this sense, the spirit of the subject, if you will, is like mutually beneficial element of the environment that I'm in. It doesn't have to be like the spirit of like ooh, spooky stuff.
And by mutually beneficial, like you know,
it's an interaction.
We clean it, We
It's
clean
an
it off.
interaction, but like I perceive it as like an extension of my own self in
Right.
some sense. In that I take something off of it, I put it back onto it as if it's just a part of
Right.
where what I'm doing.
Yeah, and there's a responsibility comes with
But-
that, as I mentioned, like cleaning it.
But imagine, like, you're not wearing shoes, you get up off this couch, you stab your toe onto the leg of that table, and immediately the meaning of this object just changes into a completely different context, in which it is a piece of shit for hurting you, even if that's for
Yeah.
your thought comes through you for a split second, and as ridiculous as it sounds, like, there is that emotional response to be getting hurt.
You swear at the table.
Like, yeah, you fucking table, or whatever. However you express the,
Something like that. Yep.
yeah. Obviously, I'm not a good dramatizing.
No,
Drama-
that's
drama
true, but
student.
that's good to give a concrete example of this type of
Thinking, yeah.
yeah.
So the point about
So it's kind of a
spirit
natural.
or-
It's a natural thing.
yeah, the point of spirit or meaning or any of those weird sounding words is to say that behind it there's always a context in which it exists, and in that context actually is what manifests this particular meaning
Now-
at that particular moment in time.
So, by the table itself, sort of entering like beyond, being perceived beyond the horizon in a very smooth way, where at one moment it's holding your stuff and you love it, the next you're swearing at it.
The next you feel stupid for doing so.
Sure, sure, fine, but that's your
Well, the spirit of the
that's
object
your-
changes. So
that's your programming coming back to its senses.
yeah, it switches
right?
from being something that it was hostile to you, for example, to something being inanimate one more time again.
Right,
For example.
but the fact that it changes kind of shows this natural mechanism, which isn't a bad thing, and I think this is related a lot to the kind of calcification of the world around us too. That we think, okay, now it's just a table again. It's like now it's just a table.
But
right?
also, no, well, calcification does something.
I
on
wanted
to-
to
on
bring
top
that
of
in.
This.
Yes.
The calcification does something different. Calcification punishes any other interpretation. So the idea of stabbing your toe and being angry at the table
Right.
for even that split second
Okay.
causes a feeling of stupidity.
Remorse of stupidity, and this is the
Right.
punishment for.
But despite the fact that the same thing we just described are still happening behind the scenes, right? The spirit of the thing changes, and
Right.
that's the actual
Yeah,
sort
so
of
this it's a
underlying
good
mechanism.
example. I think it should be an official example.
Yeah, so calcification in this case is more about deriving, punishing narratives that as a consequence of veering off of the calcified narrative that's the only true
Right.
interpretation of what this is. So calling yourself childish, for example, for getting angry at the table, or well,
Yeah.
that's still kind of valid, but whatever. As an example, it
Um,
might work, but
Well, it's the what you're saying is it's the pain that you feel by the fact that you veered off of the calcified reality.
even though the veering happens because the reality is in flux, so it'll always happen. You'll always veer off, because that's the source of pain and dysmorphism from reacting to the sense information, to the archetypical information coming through the sound bites, in each and every single moment. Why they need to transform to the next moment in the first place, what drives that little engine is the dysmorphism between the two that always tries to reconnect the reflective part to what it's being reflected, right? So
You kind of lost me, but what you're saying that mechanism of reconnection makes me think about this kind of animistic training, if you will,
right.
training towards.
What I'm saying
that.
is that there's always a dysmorphism due to another way to look at it is that these stacks are entropically they have very high or low entropy, but they're very unstable. right? They're
Right, dynamic.
yeah,
Flexible.
they're metastable instead of stable. So that inherent instability is kind of like is a dissipation towards dissipation of the stack, right? So rebuilding the stack is a dysmorphic process in itself because it's fighting off of it's the fighting off of entropy. It's the staving off of entropy, and entropy always comes in as the solution, right? Not as consolidation. So
Right.
the point in all of that is to say that there is a fundamental dysmorphism that drives the need for one moment to become the next, right? If you want to call it the source of energy for the engine that could, um, and yeah, the rest of the story here would be to have all of this take all of this into account as it's driving through moment by moment.
Mm-mm-mm. Nice. Got our monitor up. So I know that you appreciate it that you're getting deep into that the kind of stacking and atomistic stuff there. I was completely distracted a little bit, but I think we've covered a lot of it. I think in a very kind of scattered shot way, and I kind of wish I'd able to pay attention and kind of latch on a bit better to
So the main things
some of these points to kind of connect it together better.
So the main things to take into account is that we have an entropic situation in which things constantly dissolve. The stacks themselves are
Right.
high-ordered manifestations that, in a grand scheme of things, dissipate more efficiently whenever there is an entropic process happening. So an example is like how a tornado forms when there is when there is two different pressure
You could say that's a higher order sort of thing.
yeah. So the
now, how do you relate a tornado just naturally? So energy gets drawn into it. Energy feeds into the higher layers. Is what you're saying.
The full picture is that there's entropy is increasing. So no matter what, chaos is increasing. Even though there are localized spots in which order is increasing, it's still due to the fact that overall chaos is increasing still.
This little tornado analogy I just had like
it's about a spontaneous structure forming in a less structured environment,
such as the chaos of today's society, in which the guild is the tornado.
Sure.
Hey.
Yeah,
That's
but
a
a tornado can
having
be any
there.
algorithm really. It's when it's how you combine all the tornadoes together into a feedback loop that contains,
Sure,
like,
but this is kind of what I mean. Doesn't it seem like it's pointing towards that? But at the same time, and that's compelling from my point of view. But of course, we can always go the wrong way very badly. And this is kind of like the part of the reason why to write a book and articulate the guild.
So one point we made behind the scenes was that we have what's called the wake, which is the fiat projection, which is like when you have a protocol on one layer of a stack, it downloads the message onto a carrier below itself. Like for example, I have a thought, I speak it out through sound using English. That's the protocol of like how to interpret what I'm saying. It gets carried across the air, and then you hear it. Something resonates according to English in your head,
and
I transpose a thought. Now that thought, on the other hand, does not have to contain any of the information about me using sound and English to do that.
The thought itself is encapsulated.
That part of it is inherent in the actual set of sounds that
OSI,
I'm making.
OSI model
And,
networking.
and you sit there and having already known English to begin with, you know what to do with the message and whatnot. And so I didn't have to include anything about air. I didn't have to include anything about sound. I didn't have to include anything about downloading, uploading, or anything about carriers.
Right.
So this is to demonstrate how a projected message does not have to take into account how it's being projected through the actual
Right.
underlying stacks,
Now, this is
which means ultimately that they can diverge and one can become extremely dysmorphic to the other in some cases where the projected message seems to be one thing, but the consequence of it going through the stack and underneath could be destructive to the receiver stack on the other end. This could flow anything from
Right.
destructive ideas to destructive behavior.
right, and that doesn't mean it's not destructive to the self stack. It very well could be.
Oh, there's always a feedback that could be ignored, which is
Right.
which is encapsulated by the fact you don't have to include any of that
Mhm.
information. But if you include any of that information, it becomes much more clear that there's always going to be some kind of feedback resonating back in between these stacks. And that's the main shift in view between the animistic and the ontological. The ontological is a kind of like a topological, crustified, if you will,
Right. Can you describe
subsection
that
of it.
again? The feedback being the difference.
So, when the messages don't reflect the carriers that are being used through the messages, and not just not mention,
Oh, yeah,
but to
right.
neglect them entirely, then what they end up downloading onto them is effectively trash. So it's like causing a landfill to appear on the
Mhm.
lower layers. Another representation of that is how we treat nature as a dumping field for all our garbage.
Right. Or like for a quick example, if we eat
Or our brains forever for trash thoughts.
if we eat some food or whatever, but in the ingredients are harmful, toxic, whatever,
That too, yeah.
it says on the bag it's healthy, we're eating it because it's healthy, but meanwhile it's causing a destruction, you just don't know about that, destruction is caused.
Yeah, so the resonated message is like, oh, I'm eating healthy, but the actual
Right.
reaction is worse for you.
Hmm.
And it could be subtle and it could be acute. So
And this is a real, obviously, problem of commodities,
right.
commodification.
Commodification allows it to be very, very subtle, which prolongs the time for the feedback, which
Right,
effectively hides the need to pay
because
attention to it.
if everybody who ate your bread died right away,
You'd know.
You find out right away.
Whoops!
So there's a balancing act.
Yeah, so yeah, you gotta be able to delay the consequence of any
Mhm.
like substitutive action.
It has to be pushed out years, decades.
Right. And that,
Mhm.
again, this is the entire story that we covered in chronology, in that this is this ability to delay the reaction is what allows the neglect of the natural concerns, simply because you don't die right away.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that point, you neglect your concerns, you die. It's almost as simple as that.
Right. Yep. Because the sum total, if you will, of the products and commodities and services being presented by society is enough that you don't die right away. Whatever it is.
Yeah, and in the abstract, like the concern could be like, say you're an old, frail person. Obviously, you're not going to. Your main contribution to the natural concerns is not going to be your physical prowess, right? At that point, it's the social benefits that you provide to
Right.
by reiterating the stories that had worked for generations.
Mm-hmm.
So concerns are not like a one-trick pony either. It's a dynamic system in which a whole tribe takes care of all
So-
elements. But the feedback is what's important. In which what it means is that if you're old and frail and nobody feeds you, you die within days.
Right.
But if you are,
And it makes
And-
perfect sense to support that person because they can then provide another thing. So this is a form of commodification, natural commodification.
that is
Excuse me?
self-referential.
Pardon me.
Self-referential and just circles around itself. It doesn't-
Self-referential commodity. Or the term commodity already ruins it.
Well, it is a commodity as a
Um,
whole, but it's indistinguishable from any other commodity at that point. So there's no market. There's no, like you can't just like go in there and categorize. Oh,
Right.
this is for that, or this is for this. Trade doesn't
And,
happen like that.
Yeah, old people, just because somebody's old doesn't mean they have
Or children, or
a relevant experience in whatever this or that.
like imagine children having to justify their existence in such a space.
Right?
The only reason they don't have to justify their existence is because we haven't been able to figure out how to do that without a relatively large backlash from people who are overstressed by the process. But it's been attempted several times in the last century, for example.
Justify the existence of children and
Like putting them through school and like failing them early and just like badgering them about their existence the entire time they exist, so that all they know is to be neurotic about their grades and or become dropouts.
pardon.
Well, that instead of being criminal in the school system, you're a dropout, right? Or you're getting put into the
Right.
slow class,
Right.
or any other thing to single you out as a non-functional unit.
Ooh. It's a change. That's quite a change. Yeah, so back to the book for a second quickly.
Sorry.
No, we're there. We're there right now. I just want to kind of recap what we're doing here. With the meta-religion animism, this is what I wanted to get into as the last part of section, probably 2, whatever it is, regarding the polymorphic machine. We want to kind of end off on, okay, a description of life itself, quote unquote, by delivering a model of stacking grammatical capacities, a holonic model of organization of life, in order that we can talk about it and what happens and really not fall to the linear, discrete traps of discretion or whatever. The things that screw us up in talking about this is why we use the holonic model, so that at every node we say it contains the whole. That means that it is alive in a sense, in that it has a reference out to the rest. There's no, this is we're talking about this, and you connect to the rest. Context is what it can be called. There's a number of ways to reference what that is or what it's
Foreground and background.
doing. Right, so out into the background, you're the foreground to make something else the foreground by talking about another property of this holon. And so that's really what, for this book, that's what I want to deliver at this point, is an ability to talk about life in that way, in a meaningful way, grammatical capacities, and this communication of agencies as well. Would you say is happening in here to an extent?
So agencies and the ephemeral
Just-
manifestation of any particular one interpretation, one particular foreground and one particular background in that one particular moment.
Right.
With the advent of automation or crustifying what's allowed, or in other words, making those pathways artificially scarce, if you will, is another way to look at it. What you have happening is that you have only very specific agencies that are
Correct.
allowed to interact with the whole. and that
Right.
limits that doesn't.
Through automation, yes.
That-
and
that-
we're talking about the market machine.
So
already
this is the
here.
binding, the kind of
Right, right,
binding
right.
that you could be
So-
talking about when we're describing what the tether is, or
I just
something
wanted
that
to,
effect.
before we dive into that, point out that agency is something that is happening as well.
Well, I did point that out in the
polymorphic-
moment.
In the polymorphic machine.
Yeah.
Right.
The difference being is that in the ontological matrix, that's classified into very specific neural. If you were to look at it as a not a neural, just as a circuit. Imagine like cutting out a whole bunch of different pathways, only allowing specific
Right.
nodes to be there.
And I
so
like the-
everything has to go through those only single nodes. That's also the death cycle metaphor, by the way.
I like that you brought up artificial scarcity in the context of reality, because really reality is being made artificially scarce. Your potentials, by using a linear, what do we call it? Linear objectivist. I'm thinking like rational algorithmic matrix. This ontological matrix where things are set in stone.
Science.
It's that's artificial scarcity of modeling, thinking of modeling,
Right.
and
Like one example of this is the ridicule that one encounters when they step outside of that kind of status quo of the rational thinker. So anytime you step outside of talking about what's
Right.
real or what's not real, you're pretty much crazy. And when you step outside of ethical and unethical, you're pretty much Satan.
did you want to take a quick break, because we are really about halfway through today's
Sure.
little findangling. So I'd like to pick it up there. We're right on the threshold, I think. So we're gonna say that the animism stuff is pretty well described as far as how we want. And I love this transition to talking about artificial scarcity of modeling, because that's really what I wanted to point out with this animism stuff. We are revamping the APS in its ability to model not only itself but the world around it, and this is what's unlocking the more towards pure potentiality of model, which is absolutely necessary for proper interaction with the people in the world around you. Otherwise, you're shoving them into slots of your little ontological matrix. And
Making it
through affect and all that,
and so
your little narratives.
so
I get this reward. Yeah, I feel good.
And so literally what happens is that the tether that we're describing in the abstract concretely exists by the way we tether each other to these ideologies.
Right.
That's
Even
that's
just-
how it comes
just
out in the
being mean.
concrete. Yeah.
If I don't like what you said or your view, I can
Yeah.
be mean to you,
Mhm.
and you'll feel bad.
Yeah.
Or if you're struggling to make sense of reality because it all just went to hell, or some shit happened, or who knows what,
So this,
prepare
this
for even more pain.
This reminds me of the phrase of I respect people. I don't have to respect ideas. And I've already repeated this several times how this is exactly the same phrase as
That's kind
it's
kind of nice, isn't it?
love the sinner, hate the sin. But you see, it's a trick of mind in thinking that those things say something different. They don't. They tether the other person to whatever ideology you have made up for them.
To me
so
it
mutual
feels like
tethering.
a soundbite that gets often misrepresented, but which could be understood or interpreted more towards correctness, towards resonance, towards isomorphism, towards coherence. That little soundbite. These soundbites.
The problem
So
with
what
the
you're saying is
soundbite
the
is it
soundbite
categorizes
is used to make an excuse to keep doing something.
to keep people tethered. So if they tether in the abstract to the narratives of rewards and punishment of the system, in the
Right.
concrete, we are tethering each
So
other to
first
our
off,
ideologies using systemic sound bites
First off, it's a, what do they call it?
to climb over each other through because of ego.
A backhanded compliment.
Yeah.
it reminds me of.
That's exactly what
Because
that
you're
is.
saying, "Oh, I love you." But
But
what
you're- but
what
you're
you just
dirty.
said, I hope you feel pain because I'm telling you that what you believe is wrong.
You're a
And,
dirty
the
sinner.
only reason I'm saying what you believe is wrong is because you're about to feel pain. But I love you. Okay. I want only the best feelings for you, except now, in which I hope you feel bad.
Except in that moment in which I'm telling you I love you and want the best feelings for you.
Good times. Yeah. So let's take a little shindig break just for fun. No, actually, for me it's a wash and break, but
I figured.
mutual good. Yeah. Presumables. So we've got about another 45, 40, 35, whatever it is. So we'll be back to dive in to the market machine, and we're gonna continue trying to patch together this narrative of how do we jump from one to the other in the book, and where do we go from there? What do we start with? Where does it flow from there? So we'll discover that in conversation after the short break.
It
Okay, we
doesn't
back.
it doesn't upload.
We back. Ish.
So
Production. So I was saying like we're going. What's
the
the
soundbite is called production.
commodity is commodity is capital. Capital is the thing that you use to create production, to slot into production. That's what a capital is. Capital is commodities that slot into production. So into the whole myth of it, of what's going on, is we are only going to focus on production. And the oxymoron, or like insanely ironic thing about it is,
It's called production.
this is what creates the
producing.
scarcity.
Yes,
Because we're only going to go after things that of production.
right, in lieu of everything else.
But
and so the
and here we
scarcity
are-
is that you're stuck to only production. And so if you don't have means of production or access to production,
Yeah. So
there's the scarcity
so we've
that's
got-
resulting in the
we've-
fact. So if you upload everything into the productive system, you effectively remove everything from everywhere else, creating a
Right.
huge desert of scarcity.
Yes, because just as the mind works, so does the economy. In this
And
scarcity of thought we were just talking about.
and this is hidden because this isn't part of the productive myth. It
So-
doesn't have any reification of this particular outcome.
So the
It's
purpose
not a
of
product that can be sold by
the
it.
purpose of the guild is actually to realize and propagate more towards pure potentiality of the economy. This is one main result. If we're looking at what our world is and what we do with
to bring,
civilization,
to bring economy back into the fold of recognizing this
So-
landscape that it cannot actually sustain.
like if you can understand or connect this metaphor of thought being constrained artificially by not adopting this type of holonic view in which everything contains a whole, and we apply that to the economy,
In other words,
we see that we have this scarcity for no reason.
in other
And,
words, we have to turn the means of production into the production of nature itself. To turn them back onto their
Right.
source, and
Right.
and
Okay, so
and reinstate the same
So,
pattern.
production has to be holonic. Something, just because a factory exists, doesn't mean that it has to just keep making the exact same thing that it's making. It needs to take inputs from demand. That's the problem. It doesn't. It's in its own cycle, its own loop for profit, for increasing of capital.
Yeah, it's instead of responding to demand, it does the opposite of trying to facilitate it.
So like in living in Barrie, there's a lot of factories and production and shops and everything everywhere, which are not responding or respondent to the community itself. What's all surrounding it? The people everywhere, all around. It doesn't answer to that. It answers to who comes in the door with cash. They tell me to do a thing. Okay, this is why, and this sounds like communist or socialist or whatever, but why the production facilities are oriented towards this this artificial scarcity instead of this what can be opened up through holonic understanding of economics, in which the demand, the supply responds to the demand.
They're also locked by the same scarcity into producing that scarcity, meaning that everything in the means of production, in order to be able to be a producer, you have to obtain from other producers the objects that you need to be
Right.
the machinery
Right.
that you need for
Correct.
continuous production.
So if you as a
that
factory
machinery doesn't
shift,
exist,
so this is why we need like a dual power
it's like-
setup.
so no matter where you try to shift the system around, the lock-in mechanism.
That's not a problem, actually. The schedule of the production needs to respond to two at once. One to whatever keeps it going and alive in the current system, quote unquote, and another which responds to the community around it in off time, when
Yes.
available, when possible.
Yes,
This is a starting point
it's
for a
just
shift.
that it's just that like that torsion mechanism that I was talking about with you
Sure.
earlier. It
Yeah.
had
Like a rear differential on a truck or whatever.
Yeah, sometimes it has it's structured in such a way where the lock-in mechanism is immediate. It has no slip allowance of any sort, and so what I'm saying is that if it's rigid enough, like that's like it is a problem. You know what I mean? So what you're saying is that it's true, but it assumes that there's some sort of already reflective loop going on in the capacity to recognize
Right.
it. But without it, it's like that torsion mechanism in which, as soon as you have any kind of slippage that is not
Valid to the motion,
that is not
forward motion
that is
of the
not
car.
that is not perfectly distributed into like so. If the main wheel is rotating a certain way, you can only differentiate the wheels in proportion to that. So either you spin one wheel an amount equal to the slowing down of the first, or vice versa, but no more than that. Nothing else. So it has to like be exact or nothing. So if there's like that, if there's that kind of rigidity to
Yeah.
it, the locked mechanism despite physics allowing a whole lot more variation, it won't go through that path.
Right?
Again, scarcity could be looked at in that regard. A very interlocked system.
Well, I think before I get too distracted here, so how does that relate? Wait, differentials.
So I was discussing about
okay. So we're talking
structure
about
that's too locked up. Into
somebody
itself.
brought it up on the SOTS sub about dual power, and I think this is related. This is what we would call this is our version of dual power, is that the guild exists everywhere as well, and
The side channel.
where possible, the side channel, as I've called it a lot, the means of production, quote unquote, or AKA capital, should be supplying itself to demand where possible, where absolutely possible, not sitting idle. It should never be idle anymore. That's the thing about this. And an owner of capital ideally shouldn't be opposed to his capital being used when it would be idle, when it's scheduled to be idle. Fuck it. Like, this is how this is what community is. Like, that you need to interact.
And on top of that, idle does not mean. Idle also means sitting there for the sake of collecting interest. Because people would argue that it's not idling when it's collecting interest, but it's literally making itself even more scarce in that regard.
Yeah, no, you're right, of course, but we're talking about the potential towards pure potentiality that's possible when you're using a different type of economic model. Is that right? Did I say that right? Maybe.
Needs work.
Of course. So, moving then. So, how do we? Let's move into towards market machine. Like at this point, I think, we got another solid 20 minutes or something. I love that we went in pretty deep into that. The polymorphic side of it, the animism, the stacking. Like this is this has to be here.
Mm-hmm.
We need to get to that stacking the model. We need to iterate.
This is the myth upon which our myth rests.
Right. So we're saying here then, this like artificial scarcity. This is kind of where it's going wrong, and then we dive into kind of like the darkness of the pit. And it's like artificiality, it's automation.
This is the segue of this interlocking mechanism, in that you try to step outside of it, right? It's blocked, right? And before I've described it as soon as you try to stay outside of the ego, for example, the immediate response by the system is a punishment of sorts, like you're somewhere off the spectrum.
Yeah, without fail. It's almost like the system is like, it's not the system's first rodeo. It's almost like it knows just how to fucking punish you for doing something outside of its box.
And it uses an implant that it gives you from childhood to do it with.
Right. Yep.
So, yeah.
Appropriate. Yep. So
fuck the system.
We had that doesn't help. We had actually last stream, so we're kind of like, this is great though. I'm happy that we got into the animism. Yeah, being validated. In other words, it's the system is living rent free in your head.
And you cannot rape the willing.
Nope.
AKA fucking the system.
Nope. So Artificial scarcity. Take your time, man. Take your time.
Well, really, that's a defining factor between the ontological matrix proper
Yeah.
and the animistic polymorphic. Oh, excuse me.
That's a Zhenyakov.
It was a half a burp. My apologies.
Could, probably, whatever. I was going to say, like,
This is the life.
we could mute stuff, but it's, as always, a casual meeting. It's, we
We're
love
not
it.
doing anything illegal.
We love it that people do hang out with us live on,
Oh, excuse
I wouldn't
me.
say most occasions, but many occasions. And it's awesome.
Sorry. Almost done.
We're getting the full experience here right now. Which is, truly a little gift, a little blessing, a little treat, if you will. So in my summation, Section 4 market machines started with the spectrum of stupidity itself. And I just want to mention that we have gone into many topics on what we could call the dark side or the negative side, if you will. And again, to reiterate, the book up to this point, I wanted to be given kind of the bright side, or like just life itself, like kind of a neutral kind of abstract position, and then say, okay, you got this great, everything's great, and then here's what happens when you automate and
the
create
spectrum of
artificial scarcity.
The spectrum of stupidity is another representation of the created artificial scarcity. You have two extremes, and on both extremes you have two
right.
categorical...
A dichotomy. It's always a dichotomy because there has to be a fight. You have to fight one against the other. You don't just have a
Before we even
opinion.
get there,
This is what sustains it all
so
on certain levels, if you will.
right.
Yep. Go ahead.
But the basic dichotomy here in the spectrum is one of objectivism, the other of solipsism. Objectivism dealing with the real and the unreal, the solipsistic dealing with the
Now,
ethical and unethical.
the real
both
and
have
unreal.
both have ways to place somebody under, and it just so happens that
Isn't-
they also cross each other in such a
Wait.
way in that the solipsist becomes the
Sure,
person
at
that's
its extremes.
not unrealistic,
At its
and the
extremes.
objectivist becomes the person that's unethical. So they do have a way to refer back to each other
Yep.
across the spectrum. and so in that's this is the basic scarcity that is created by the marketing soundbites mythology.
Right. That everything discussing a shared context is limited to what exists or doesn't exist, or what is ethical and what is not ethical.
Right. So
Period. That's all we ever can talk about at a social level.
Exactly. So this is not to say that this is that. It's more like this is how we represent that particular artificial scarcity as it becomes relevant back to the model that we are trying to discuss. So, from the perspective of the model that we're discussing, the scarcity that's created in this most relevant format is what we call in the spectrum of stupidity.
Right.
And so in this,
Interesting.
and so another,
This really underpins it all. Like this is our politics. This is how we discuss with each other. This is how we reason out our shared responsibilities, and our relationships
right.
are mediated by the spectrum of stupidity.
And now, if you juxtapose the spectrum of stupidity with the other picture of the ego matrix, of the scarce ego matrix, agent matrix, the ones that's driven by ego, which is the spectrum of stupidity itself, you get a particular picture of the kinds of agencies that are being locked into. And so we have basically, and this is given to us with our institutional mythologies like religion, politics. You can have religious leaders, you can have political leaders. You can only have leaders. Like, again, you
Right.
see that hierarchical structure in being juxtaposed upon absolutely everything.
Leaders who are basically responsible for regurgitating
Either the
talking points
either
of the
reality,
spectrum
either reality
or ethics.
or ethics.
Right. Gotcha. That makes sense.
And so the market
So-
machine is of course, like mostly.
No, wait. Did we skip?
No.
Because
We just
I
did
see
these
market
two.
machine there.
We just did these two.
So
I
to
skipped-
put these under the camera, is it still cameras active? Camera go.
Yeah, so I just did these two up here. So market machine is next, and the market machine is literally the view of this picture that we just described, but more like a circuit board in which instead of electrons, it's currency.
With the economy.
Yeah. Like, the whole thing reduces to currency being thrown between clouds,
Mm-hmm.
obfuscated clouds, and that is the obfuscated meta narrative as a whole, and hence why it's obfuscated, because it's all
Right,
the-
right,
it's all
okay,
these
so
it's all these stupid
Just
stacks.
for the book, though, I'm trying to think right now. Like, what should be the order of introduction of these? I like Spectrum of Stupidity because it underpins all discourse about anything else, right?
So we introduced it by saying that we have the stacking animistic worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Then we said artificial scarcity is like taking all of that and only allowing specific circuitry to be there.
In other words,
In a-
taking knowledge of that,
Yeah,
and giving a
very-
subset of that knowledge.
in a very self-locked way that every time you try to break off of it, it's just all the other parts
So-
resist it.
You have to be born into this. If you learn of it, you can't unlearn of it. That's an interesting take on that, I
That's
guess.
why we're all here talking about it instead of doing it like we're supposed to.
That's a weird fucking take, isn't it? That a thing like that would exist.
Well, it
You
took us
have to
30
be-
years to know that we should even talk about it. So,
What it's like the question: what can be unlearned?
indeed, tough one.
That is fucking tough. Memories of learnings can become part of recontextualized or reformatted regions, which become completely like just memory detail in another
I think
systems.
I think this is why the only real solution in my mind, this is my personal opinion, has been to tag on this new language on top of the language, as to not erase what's there, but rebuild.
course,
but
yeah.
but like put like bridges between here and here over top,
Well,
so that you can navigate.
This is called
and jump.
the bridge is facilitating what's called a eureka moment, in which regions of the neurology shift at I think meta and meta scales, where a lot like you feel it at a higher meta layer when
I think-
the affect from so many different sense regions
I
all
think-
shift at the same
I
time.
think the question of how much you can unlearn is actually wrong.
Like memory affect.
You can't unlearn. So I think the question of how much you can unlearn is wrong, and in fact, the whole idea of unlearning is stupid.
That's part of the point, though. This would be a question to
The
ask somebody.
the question, if we are to go by what we're saying, is how much we can reintegrate, given what
Of
we
course,
already
the positive
have.
view. Yep. Correct.
How much we can take what we have and reintegrate it again
Um,
and again and again and again until it's
And-
all connected.
There's like a million paths, and none of them are wrong.
Well, the ones that self-circle and don't go anywhere could be objectively
Maybe this is
be
one of the
seen
first
as
things to
wrong
understand.
and not useful.
That may be one of the
But they're
first
there.
things
There
to
will be there.
understand. No, what I was what I was envisioning was pure potentiality, not
Well, that's the
what you do or what you think or what
well,
happens.
that's the ideal, but pure potentiality is the goal if you were to have a goal here.
Right.
Um,
Towards that, just invoking the idea kind of brings it into.
Yeah, but the actual journey there is never going to look like the destination. If your journey and destination look the same, you're still on the journey. You didn't arrive yet. Like, I don't understand.
What about life as a journey?
Well, not life. There's journeys in life.
But life itself isn't just one of those.
Life is just life.
Life is life. True words. I've heard that before.
Life is life. Journeys are journeys. It's not the correct metaphor for it. Because life is just the activity of, like, you know, not manifesting, emergence and the dissipation, like some form of consolidation
Yeah.
of meaning
And decay.
and the decay of that
Of stacks.
of that meaning in some particular narrative.
And that's what we're conveying or trying to with at a lower level, archetypal level, this
Yeah.
model.
But journeys, like, is something that allows that journeys is something life allows to happen. Due to life is like one layer of it. A journey is the thing that happens at top of life when you have a narrative.
Right. No, I see what you're saying. Like, why confuse life itself with journey as if life itself can just become a concept in your head, thus shortcutting the whole freaking thing. And this is again what we're talking about.
But life is exactly what is happening.
Don't
It's
make
not
that
even-
mistake.
Yeah, conceptually, it's a freaking shit show if you do it. A useless one, in particular. It's always about uselessness. And you might sound like overly utilitarian, but that's not even the case. Utility is one part of it. Resonance is really the whole of it. Not resonance, sorry. Harmony.
Coherence.
Coherence, harmony.
Coherence.
Harmony of the wake, coherence of the
Is there a
path.
difference? Are we defining? Because I don't remember if I heard harmony.
Harmony would be like...
Harmony is a type of coherence.
Yeah, it's
Usually vocally heard.
with
Although harmonious,
with the stack imagery,
it's practically the same word.
with the stack imagery, with everything giving a resonance wakes everywhere, harmony should be in the resonance of the wakes. Right? The difference between an orchestra playing everybody for himself and everybody playing together. So there's always going to be some kind of resonance, but whether it's harmonious or not.
But coherence is the word that we're trying to
Coherence.
juxtapose
Coherence is how you get.
with harmonious.
Coherence is what you increase to get to become harmonious. Yes, more and more harmonious. There was
How do these?
there-
Is it two different concepts? Like, how does that even differ?
No, not two different concepts. One is just more like a reference to the wake. The other is more a reference to to like your own journey and path, and then like degrees of not degrees of coherence, but
Okay.
uh,
Okay. Yeah.
progress.
So harmony being the wake
Yeah, it's
wake
more like
analysis.
it's more like the static image from the top.
Harmony is wake analysis, and coherence as journey oriented.
Yeah,
Uh,
domains of progress, the activity that you do. You increase your coherence, and as you increase your coherence, your wakes are more harmonious.
So you're also pointing to the neural OS
Not
itself.
your wakes, but you know. What I
The
mean.
neural OS itself, a bundle of neurons that's holding some map of life.
Yes.
That's what we point to when we say coherence.
It must
Harmony
be
is irrelevant is kind of separate of that, of the effect, the wake effects.
Yeah, you can have
along the media.
You can have a self-harmonious something that is completely
Right?
coherent
That's
with
correct.
everything else.
I just added that and you didn't even catch it. No, what I mean is I was the one who added that, and you didn't add it.
Oh.
It's one of those, yeah, well, pulling an academic, feeling all academic over here.
Well, yeah, but the academy is just like taking an image and twisting it every which way.
Coherence is associated with a particular neural OS of whatever complexity. Could be a snail brain.
Well, degrees of coherence are what? Participation, membership, mastery, and grand mastery.
Guessed, if you want.
So those speak to experiential states. You experience your participation, you experience your membership, you experience your mastery, and you experience your grand mastery. On the flip side, harmony is perceived by, right, as experienced by others, like
It's kind of an objective,
or more
objectivist.
or more like perceived of the whole itself. You know, like you see the harmony of the whole. You can't
So,
you
okay,
can't hear a
hold
harmony
on,
of a
wait,
note,
Timmy, let me just
right?
finish
A single
this
coherent
discussion.
note does not do.
We're talking about the difference between, again, subjective and an objective view.
Yeah.
The solipsistic and the objectivist.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it too. Yeah. So if you were to put it onto the spectrum, that's where
what
it will
that is.
land.
Beauty.
But being one and the same, in its essence, is what avoids it being truly onto the spectrum, because it doesn't land in any one specific category. You go here, it's coherence. You go there, it's resonance or harmony.
Of course, and you could say, oh, the experience in my coherence is harmonious.
Actually, the spectrum of stupidity corresponds very well to the dichotomy between order and chaos.
Yeah.
It's entirely connected
to add
that.
another layer to what I said. Yes.
It's entirely connected to those two archetypes.
Yeah. So we're really establishing a model, speaking the language, and it's very helpful. And it's interesting that it lines up, that what we talk about order and chaos, it lines up with the yin and yang, the masculine and feminine. And
yeah, discussion beyond
our
this.
language gives us explaining power in those models as well, of whatever whatever it is, right?
Right, and again, that comes back to it being more of a resonant and harmonious element rather than a specific algorithmic procedure.
Harmonious. Well, we got about 5-10 minutes skis, we'll say.
Let's just jibber jabber.
Yep.
I'm done.
Take her easy. Did you want to just hit a bathroom break for a bit, or
I'm good.
I
Surprisingly.
think we'll just cut her here?
Yeah, I'm done as far as thinking too hard. If you want to talk, I'll talk. Yeah, definitely.
Cool, man. Yep. Yeah, I gotcha. So we're at basically the market machine section. We've covered quite a bit today, which was awesome.
Yeah. So,
And
as far as that goes, market machine is just another view of the ontological matrix, but with like the added bonus of now everything is obfuscated clouds, just sending currency at each other.
So what I want to add here is that the ontological matrix is a natural consequence of a bunch of neural units with this complexity connecting together. And there is we call it polymorphic machine on one side of it, you could say.
But with the applied
and
scarcity.
The polymorphic machine can have a scarcity applied to it through the market machine with this affect.
With scarcity applied, it is the market machine.
Through that, yeah. I was just trying to go like
if you were to take like DNA and just start tinkering with it, and just like fold it a certain way, and just like, okay, now you're just this only one robotic
Right.
thing. That's it. It's done.
So this is the great question of Michelangelo, or like some of them fucking know old ass philosophers talking about carving marble. What is better, to have a beautiful sculpture of like some dude flexing, or to just not touch that marble, which has more potential, can become way more than that, right?
Well, that's a question. That's like the question of
That's
like
an
high
interesting-
entropy to low entropy
Right.
dynamic.
Interesting metaphor.
Because at the end of the day, anything like that's lower entropy but metastable with higher potential has to happen with something from lower potential but more greater instability kind of thing. It's a weird dynamic between
The
entropy
tornado
and-
situation. So
Yeah.
that's an interesting metaphor. Let's use that for the stacking metaphor, having tornadoes. Like, and this is kind of how I thought of archetypes flowing up throughout the stack, was that any new layer has to take into account its lower archetypes, which is kind of like a tornado funnel, pulling together a bunch of things to exist that need to exist and somehow
represent
can
a tornado.
articulate in such a way that, yes, on this layer the tornado passes up, and you have all these archetypes just flying through up the stack. That's kind of one way I vision, and it's at each layer doing that, where if you're trying to model it, these archetypes passing through, and then you can say, oh, what does that archetype look like in my reality, in my existence, in my community,
If you think about archetypes
with
and
my
the,
objects,
and the way
my artifacts.
and the way a neural system works is that the senses receive a signal, and then whatever the neural network setup is just it now circulates the fact that the signal has passed. The senses receive another signal. Those two combine, and then the end result, plus the fact that the signals have passed, plus the fact that there's an end result, and it just
Right.
keeps spinning and spinning and
Right,
spinning
right.
until with enough repetition, the neural network establishes that the eyes produce this imagery, the nose produces the smells, and,
Right.
and this is together becomes a context, and
Right.
and it just builds and builds and builds and builds.
Fire
and builds
together,
and builds
wire
and builds.
together.
Over time.
like,
So
yeah,
by
it's
the
great.
time you and I are talking, we're so far into this process that we close
We're
our
walking-
eyes.
we're
You
walking
say
a path.
You say chair, I imagine chair. You say sofa, I imagine sofa. Like it's not even. It's completely automatic.
I like
but
the
that's part
metaphor.
of,
The metaphor of walking through any forest is any well-walked forest is having paths.
Mhm.
So some are well trodden, some are off the normal path. And it's sort of like that. The more you use it, the more it
Mhm.
becomes worn and obvious as a main path.
Yeah, another way to look at scarcity in this scenario is eliminating the pathways that are undesirable to the point of where the system becomes inflexible of trying new paths
So
after that.
here's an interesting one, yes. And when injury happens, that's bad.
But this is another
So-
type of injury then.
Think about, for
If you
example,
think about it, this would be another type of injury.
it's a neurological injury. So imagine a fungus that spans kilometers or something, like these background
Yep.
things.
That's usually how it goes.
Or a mushroom in a substrate, or bacteria. I'm trying to remember what they're like, but or which particular species portrays this best. But the idea that if you have food sources here and there, like major energy sources, a network will be grown between these mushrooms or whatever to like speak to this tree and that tree, and like there's pathways are formed between the node. This is a tree, this is a tree, this is like a bunch of roots in the ground.
Oh yeah,
And
like,
the mushroom underneath kind of knows that and doesn't need to just be where there's no trees.
it's
Right?
more
And it just-
it's even more complicated
it
than
finds
that
itself.
because the trees also benefit from the relationship, and they become knowledgeable in where the nutrients for the tree is. There's a nutrient exchange system between the mushrooms and the trees. So the trees also signal to the
Right.
to the fungus that there is food sources.
So,
So
I
it's
would,
not just
I would
so
pull it
it's-
up, but there are pictures of this, and the comparison is how the U.S. highway system has evolved. So between cities, you see a similar structure, okay?
Doesn't seem very intelligent to me, does it?
So you end up vaguely connecting every city to every one, and the more the connection-ish, that's where the corridors of highway are, right? The state system. So
That's how you play SimCity, really.
so what I think we're saying here, in a way, is that this is like, now there are only major highways and a tree system, and you can't drive anywhere else. Like, you have to connect to your main tree road, your local tree road.
Yes, you can't veer off
And
the
you
path.
must go to the nearest highway intersection this
This-
way,
so-
depending on your source and destination.
In other words, the exploratory paths are completely being cut off.
You must stay on the state system with your insured, valid, whatever,
And the-
state registered vehicle.
And this is the same description as, like, if you dare challenge the system, it's immediate pain. Any challenge to the ego is immediate pain.
Right, because you have a GPS on your car, right? They'll know right away. The local thing is
Well,
already
you-
dispatched.
No, this is the myth of conscience. Your compass, your inner compass that punishes you for not
'Kay, right.
obeying the system. That's the first step. Conscience is like the greatest trick of the system is to install the chip inside of you.
Of
And-
course,
and
well,
make
yes.
it seem like it's you.
This scarce reality becomes installed. In other words, you think with it, and this is the problem of the spectacle. And people are like, "Oh, I'll just go out and volunteer, and volunteer here and there, and society will become better, and then we'll fix everything." Like, does it? Well, that's the question. Does it fix everything?
People have been trying that for thousands of years, ever since civilization has begun.
You're adding band-aids to a band-aid ball. It's not helping the thing that keeps propagating this way of thinking that is cancerous, essentially.
Yeah.
Right?
And
A
the way-
runaway cancer, a breakaway civilization. that's
And
what
the
I
way
call
of
it.
thinking
That's why I
is
call it
really
that.
what it's about. Why the source of why there's so much
Your model
time
is
spent on
uh,
contrasting the matrix
limited.
with the machines that are involved. Because there's going to be a machine involved, but the polymorphic machine allows for the exploratory path, which is untapped.
And the polymorphic machine is something you can't unlearn when you learn about it, because it's the thing that was doing what you were doing. So when you see when that, et cetera, we'll call that one that. Call it a thing and call it a night, pretty much.
Yep.
Got to get you home, buddy. But thanks for, hey, that was a great little session, mini, like half, at least to kind of catch up. Because we've been doing every 2 weeks for 1 1/3 of a year. It's coming up on a 1.5 year anniversary of this, every 2 weeks. In the start, we did every week, right? Like, remember, like for a month or two?
Mhm.
We were pretty hardcore on getting it started, so we don't want to let this end per se. And YouTube simply becomes, for us, a way to project and share potentially, and sometimes, and we appreciate.
As long as the recordings are out there, that's one thing.
Yep.
We'll do the book as a serious project.
Well, I was
And
I was
then
just
the
thinking
manual.
today too, like,
And the manual.
yeah, like, this is my quote unquote project that I am kind of dedicating myself to sprint towards. Let's get a table of contents, but I will write it out. Like, I will. Right now, I'm thinking like between 100,000 and 1,200.
Every single
120
you've made, we have
words.
gone through and made.
Like, I think we can get a decent
Sequence.
sized chunk book out of this, but I don't want to go, like the 200,000. I don't want this to be a big thing.
What I want.
I want it to be like a good start.
No, no.
you know?
Every detail I'm giving you is a way to link the sequence together. That's it.
That's what we've been driving for. Yep.
So
And tis-
all the different modeling bits.
tis
that
been
we've
good.
gotten,
Well, it got dark, eh?
all the different models, bits that
Got dark, eh, man?
Yeah, all the different model bits that I've been trying to get to were to drive from one point to the next point to the next
Yeah,
point to the next
appreciate,
point.
100%, yep.
So chronology of spectacular system can speak to how
The fourth, the next one.
how scarcity built up.
So in my head, this was to introduce what happened at the walled city. What was happening? What was the process of externalizing thought processes?
Externalizing, making things scarce. Externalizing is the same as commodifying. Is the
Right.
same
Yes,
as,
yes.
as put it onto the belt of production. And belt
Right.
of production feeds only into itself,
itself.
literally, and therefore you don't have access to anything beyond production.
Right.
Again. So scarcifying
Beyond what is
and
produced.
Scarcifying, commodifying, and what was the other word you used? Walled city.
Externalizing.
External.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, we gotta.
Yeah, man.
Sorry to rush.
Well, as you can see, we're in the pitch darkness here, so
I'll take a leak and hopefully that'll be enough.
heck yeah, buddy. And appreciates to everybody who tag along and sharing this adventure with us. But just quickly, as I was saying, I committed with this project. This is why this is the third of the last, maybe we thought it could be the last one of this series, to write the book. And I basically committed that whatever we talked about, I'm just going to write about it as if, of course I'll still keep watch on the arc and all that, but I'm just going to try to run with this table of contents that we've created. We still, again, the animism stuff like that, we didn't do well last time, and we totally got into that, which is perfect, because then next is what Zhenya quickly articulated before the end of the last stream, which was into the market machine and kind of these negative quote-unquote things, like we got into the spectrum of stupidity, which is create reality versus ethics, as the subjectivist sides to it, and I think that's what we'll probably be getting into, maybe not even next time. Chronology, ego stacking, we've mostly done this. The death circle would be we'll talk about the death circle, the ending of this kind of section, and then I believe we have to get into like organization itself, the guild, in other words, what we call the field manual, in other words, what to do, like the thing, like you're given something and go do it ish, combined with / after that the organization of companies, corporations, in like franchise style, guild training, certification, like the practical side of the corp. And that's it for today.